My name is Adrienne Laosa, and I am the managing partner of Treaty Oak Property Management here in Austin, Texas. And today you are joining us for our live webinar going over leasing best practices. And joining us is our guest today, Kelli Lopez with JB Goodwin Realtors, also known as a local leasing expert here in town. Kelli's awesome. Kelli and I have been working together as leasing colleagues for several years now. Treaty Oak gets a high volume of leasing leads and tenant inquiries, and Kelli has really got her practices dialed in on tenant and landlord representation. Because we are a large property management company, we do not offer a la carte leasing services. And so Kelli and I have formed a really great, well-working relationship so that she can handle the needs of owners who just want leasing services and perhaps self-manage themselves or have some other thoughts in mind on how to manage their tenants and needs. So the objective of today's webinar is to talk about, we're going to separate them out a little bit. We're going to talk about landlord representation. We're going to talk about tenant representation. We're also going to talk about, we're going to do a Q&A at the end, and we're going to talk about just what works a lot and works really well for Kelli and ourselves. At Treaty Oak, on average, we do anywhere from 100 to 150 leases a year. And I wanted to help our colleagues in the real estate market. Leasing is just a really interesting practice. It is the way a lot of us get into the real estate career and field. Leasing sometimes doesn't get all of the attention that it so very well deserves. And so the purpose of these webinars is really just to always provide value to our colleagues. I know that our leasing colleagues are working really hard out here. There's often less zeros involved in the compensation of lease transactions. And so I'm going to go ahead and let Kelli introduce herself, tell you about her background, and tell us about her experience in the leasing world.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelli Lopez. I'm with JB Goodwin Realtors. I've been there this summer. It'll be 8 years. I started after I kind of transitioned out of education. My husband and I were looking to purchase some rentals and kind of start making some passive income that way. So I was kind of already fortuitously, I guess, headed that way because I took care of the advertising, the postings, the screening, the paperwork, even though I kind of really didn't know what I was doing then. It was before I got licensed. And then my husband, of course, took care of the back end, the maintenance, the money collection, that part of it. And then I think about a year later, I think that's when I finally got licensed and had a much better understanding of not just the legalities of leasing, but paperwork and how to be a little bit more cognizant of quality tenant screening and following up with paperwork. And so that's kind of how I've transitioned over. My first couple of years with JB Goodwin were because I was transitioning to a new career. Right. I did not have a book of business, so trying to start over was a little tough, but I got rolling with some lease leads and some lease listings, and eventually that kind of became my niche and my specialty, and I've been enjoying it ever since.
Do you do every year?
The listing side really picked up the last 3 to 4 years. The first 3 to 4 years was mainly just lease leads. Any year I was doing anywhere from about 80 to 100-ish. Closed transactions. And that stayed pretty consistent, although more of them are now, not more, a little bit more coming from the listing side since I picked that part of the business up. So I would say on average anywhere from 80 to 100 total lease transactions per year.
Okay, cool.
I don't have an assistant. I do it all myself.
That's awesome. No, I know that you are an absolute hustler. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and start with landlord representation. At Treaty Oak, we represent a ton of landlords. We've got about 350 properties within our inventory. And so that's a lot of landlords and obviously what we do day in and day out. What are, in your opinion and in your experience, what are the key steps to a smooth and successful leasing process with landlords?
I really believe, and it took me some time to hone this, but really it's all the communication from the get-go. Having a pretty good knowledge of leasing contracts and leasing policies and leasing laws so that you can share that information with your landlords. If it's a if it's a newbie landlord, you really have to walk them, hold their hand and have conversations repeatedly because they don't know. They don't know the ins and outs, all the intricacies of what leasing entails. If it's a more experienced, it's a veteran landlord, then it's not quite as involved because they're pretty familiar with the process. They know what the contracts look like. They know what everything means. They just need help with the advertising and the screening. But it has to be communication, knowing your expectations and your boundaries, talking to them and see what their goals are. Are they looking for a quick lease and let's just get it going, let's get it done? Are they looking, or do they have time where let's see how the market is and then we'll strategically drop prices slowly? That front end conversation that will save you a lot of confusion, frustration, and that helps build confidence in the relationship from the beginning. That has to be number one. Just like with tenants, just like with your sellers. It's no different. It's that beginning conversation.
1,000,000%. Setting expectations. When I am introduced to a landlord at Treaty Oak for property management services, the first thing we do is, after telling them about our fees and services and our management style, we will jump onto a video call. And the first thing I say is, please tell me about yourself. Tell me about your goals. And I have them reiterate what their goals are. We make sure that we align there on philosophies and strategy. And then I roll into expectation setting, right? This is how things work. These are the services I provide. Here is what you're expected to do as a landlord. Texas property code is a really fun topic to touch on and make sure that clients are educated about, right? The lease contract, how we write a lease contract, what you are able to do and what you are able not to do as it pertains to the lease contract. This sounds so simple, but starting the conversation out, informing clients of what they're required to do and what they can and cannot do, and saying no often as it pertains to clients who perhaps are not experts in the leasing field. One of a great example of a preliminary question that a new client might ask me in our initial conversation is, well, I love my house so much. It's so cool. Tell me about the tenant identification process, because this house is really great for X, Y, and Z type of tenant. And the X, Y, and Z description that they're giving to me is almost often an iteration of some sort of fair housing violation.
Yep.
And so what I tell my clients in that situation is, well, you are not involved with the tenant identification process. We are fair housing experts here. And so what we will do is we will share with you our approval process. You're going to agree to these approval requirements. And then that is what we're going to advertise for your property. When I tell you that we have an approved applicant, what that means and what you can assume is that they have met all of these approval requirements and that they are well qualified for the home. And we're going to go ahead and sign them up on a lease. What you want you want the owner and the landlord to do is say, okay, the reason why we have them sign off and agree to our approval requirements, and sometimes a landlord may have their own if they're experienced, right? But the reason we do that is so that we never inadvertently put our landlords in a position to violate fair housing laws, right? And so when you explain it to a client that way, they should be appreciative that you have their best interests in mind and that you are representing them as is your fiduciary duty to them.
Right. I've kind of crafted an intro email. So after I have the initial welcome introductory conversation, whether it's on the phone or through email or text, there's an email a default email I send out, like, here's so excited to be partnering with you. Here's all the documents that may be involved in our process. And I just give a quick blurb of what they mean, because some of them can be overwhelming. And I ask them to please review, read them over, get back to me with questions, because this is a legal contract and we have to make sure that we follow all fair housing laws, especially when it comes to animals. And that sometimes seems to mitigate some of the initial, sometimes they have these fallacies of what they can or cannot do, like you said, that kind of covers it in black and white. So they know kind of the direction they're heading into and what the expectations are on the legal side of leasing.
Absolutely. It's super important to kind of come out the gate with those tidbits of really important information, right? Those are must knows. Common mistakes that landlords make in leasing agreements. This is a good topic. What are some common mistakes that you see landlords make in lease agreements that they want to put in there, or that you advise them against, that are not to their benefit, but they might think is to their benefit?
A lot of it pre-lease agreement, but pricing is often a difficult topic because you can run the numbers all day long, show them the data, and because it's a sentimental property, they feel that it's worth so much more, and you got to walk that tightrope of, yes, I know you love your house, and here's what the market is saying now. So we need to have an honest discussion of, yes, your house is beautiful, it's worth a lot. However, as of today, this is what the numbers are saying. And some are quick to like, okay, you're right. Let me be realistic. It's more like, oh, okay, we start here, and then maybe in 2 weeks, and then you got to decide if you want to go that route or not. Real and truly not understanding. Yeah, they can say they've read the agreement, but they truly don't understand it because they're just signing it just so they can get their house in the market. I've had some of those with special provisions. I've had some landlords not want to add anything, like nothing. They just want to leave it blank. I'm like, can we at least they have to clean the house before they move out?
Sure. Move out inspections.
Just reiterate when funds are due, like something. Can we put something in there? Because obviously the leases are in a way where it's going to cover a lot. It doesn't cover all situations. And on the flip side, I've had some landlord clients that they're so like they've had 2-3 page landlord addendum that every little thing. And that to some people can really like scare them off. Like, I don't want to, because then they're going to think the landlord client is being super
micromanaging.
Like they're going to be, watching their house day and night. And that will like scare off some people. Like, I don't need a landlord looking over my shoulder every day. So then you got to find a happy medium. Like, what is it that you really need to emphasize? And what are your priorities? Oh my, the lights just went out in here now. Let me get up and see like, sorry.
That's okay, Kelly. You got it.
So finding the fine line between saying enough and not spelling out too much.
Right. Too much and not saying enough. Couple things that we include and we always want to address in lease agreements are appliances. Who's responsible for clogged drains? Who's responsible for lawn care? Who's responsible for utilities? Those are really important call outs. Those are things that we often get questions about. For us at Treaty Oak, for example, we put the responsibility of maintenance for the refrigerator, the washer, and the dryer on the tenant. And we outline that in an appliance addendum. The appliance addendum also identifies who owns what, so that you don't come to the end of a lease and find that your refrigerator has, made it to the moving truck, things like that. So I think that that's very important. Properties that are in an HOA. There is a portion in the TXR lease that allows you to identify the HOA, and that is always an opportunity for us as landlord representation to send a copy of the bylaws to the tenant. And what the bylaws of the HOA do or explain, and you always want to sort of call this out to the tenant, is, what you are required to do in terms of lawn maintenance, when your garage cans are out, what you can have on the street, what you can and cannot have on the street. And this usually helps a tenant navigate their responsibilities on the tenant side for proper lawn care maintenance, making sure their trash cans aren't being left out an extra day and getting financial violations for those. So those are all super important call outs in the lease agreement that can often be left out. For us, the other item that I always suggest that a landlord have in a lease agreement, it's super important, is the early lease termination clause. That is very important. And the understanding on how to explain that, which is the only way the TXR lease allows a tenant to break a lease the right way and get out of the lease contract without if it is adhered to properly, right? And that's the only way that a tenant is allowed to get out of a lease without damage to their credit, without damage to their rental history. So make sure that you fill in those components on the early lease termination portion of the lease as well. So
yeah, because if you don't, that'll be the situation where someone wants to terminate or they abandon and there's nothing in the lease or your landlord client to recoup any of those costs. So yeah, fill out And if you don't do a lot of leases or you haven't done a lot of leases yet, have a supervisor, have one of your veteran colleagues review the lease for you, make sure you filled in everything that needs to be filled in.
Right. Rosalind asked in the chat, can we elaborate some more on that? Yes. I'm also happy to. I have a really awesome FAQ on my website about the early lease termination clause as it is presented to the tenant. But the early lease termination clause is within the TXR lease form that we all use, the promulgated forms. And what we do is at Treaty Oak, for example, we do not allow subleasing. We only allow the exercise of the early lease termination clause. And there is a fee involved with it. And essentially it requires the tenants continue to maintain all of their contractual obligations. So the early lease termination fee is paid, and then the tenant continues to pay rent, all utilities, and any other financial and uphold all other contractual obligations of the lease until I, at Treaty Oak, identify another approved tenant for that home, for that landlord, based on the approval requirements that we have at Treaty Oak. So we're not allowing subleasing or anything like that. And what this essentially should do is provide the landlord with a tenant swap that is essentially a financially free event for them, right? There's no financial event. This should minimize risk for your landlords if you're able to properly exercise that early termination portion. Rosalind, if you want, I can email you a link to my website after this. Actually, Stephanie, if you're able to link that in the chat to our FAQ stuff with Treaty Oak, if you guys know her, she's watching.
And I can vouch for Adrienne. She has a very, very thorough website that explains qualifying criteria. Here's a sample of the lease with all our required criteria, the appliance addendum, the pet. I mean, everything is laid out there. So if you just wanted an idea of what you could or could not share with, with landlord clients, of course, your landlord clients will differ than Adrienne's for the most part. But if you want an idea of what a good answer is, go look at Adrienne's website. Really informative.
We do have thanks, Kelly. On our Treaty Oak website, we do have a portion that I am building out and I've been building out called Landlord Resources. And these are resources for agents who have self-managing landlord clients, or maybe you're an agent who is self-managing yourself. And so I am building out that portion of the website. There should be a lot of good information there if you ever want to navigate over to that side. Next question. Kelly, you touched on setting competitive rental prices in today's market. I would say, what are marketing strategies that attract quality tenants? And of course, the, overall philosophy that most landlords should have, especially in this market where it's oversaturated, is eliminating vacancy. And so do you have any tips or tricks for pricing properties accurately in this market?
Of course, running your CMA, that's going to be your first baseline. And some landlords will find that to be something that they can easily judge. And like I mentioned earlier, some are going to want to increase the rent, and especially since they got more in the past, but because it's a slower market this year, they think maybe they're hoping they can still get that price from last year. Maybe not. Again, you've got to just show them the numbers and say, here's everything that's rented in your neighborhood for however long you want to go back. I mean, if you just want to go even a year, I mean, I know it's kind of not the same, but it kind of is. Just show them. So pricing's always, and the same thing with sellers. Pricing's always going to be the number one data point people are going to look at. And I think with renters, what I experience on my side is what appliances are included. They have to buy or rent or get a fridge, washer, dryer. That's another additional expense that they may not be anticipating. So I like it when landlords provide those appliances. Even if the tenants have their own, they can always sell them, store them, put them somewhere else and keep them maybe down the road. But at least a fridge. I find that most tenants appreciate just a fridge. They can find their way around a washer, dryer. Fridge is all three appliances, a real wallet buster for some people. Especially some that are already tied on a tight budget. And then, of course, upkeep, maintenance. Like if you're just slapping paint on a wall and calling it good, but you're not maintaining or upgrading other parts of the house that people deem, people are observant. They see when things are just being patched up as a Band-Aid as opposed to someone who's really keeping up the property. Yeah. And so a lot of times if they're keeping up the property, an appliance at one is included, then that can justify maybe paying a price that they may not like per se, but they'll do it because then they have a sense of a landlord that cares about their property and will maintain it, as opposed to you just walk in and it's a crappy, it's crappy looking, it's dirty, and then it's overpriced. Forget it. That one's going to sit.
Of course.
Combination of property condition, price. From my experience, are appliances included? This is the yard well kept? Because most people have pets. They want a yard. It's a bunch of little single data points that can really make a difference to whether a property gets rented or
1,000,000%. Yeah, 1,000,000%. So if your focus is to eliminate vacancy, right, you want to price the property accurately, especially in this market. We have a ton of inventory. So we don't want to try and chase an extra $100 a month in rent, spend an extra 60 days on the market. That doesn't make sense. $100 a month is only $1,200 a year. The average rental rate in Austin hangs out at about $2,500 a month. So if we are chasing an extra $100 a month for the year, but we're spending 2 months on the market, well, we've lost $5,000 trying to chase $1,200. So that math doesn't math. And then once we secure really great tenants who are well qualified, we want to focus on tenant retention. So your points, Kelli, about maintaining the property, having someone who is responsive when we put in work orders, things like that, it's really important. Money is very expensive these days. We have inflation, and I have noticed that our lease listings that have things like additional features, right? Perhaps like an outside spa or an additional, like a neighborhood full of 4 bedrooms, and we've got the 5-bedroom layout. Tenants are being very conservative with those things. They want weather stripping in the home. They're super dialed into what their monthly expenses are. And so making sure that we are cognizant of that as landlords and focusing on tenant retention, that eliminates vacancy. The better you take care of your home, the happier your tenants are. And the happier your tenants are, the less likely they are to move out on a whim or because they're upset. Certainly you want to avoid that as well. Once you focus on eliminating vacancy, your immediate next focus needs to be on tenant retention. Also, I think that extra fees and leases is a big problem for a lot of tenants. So when we talk about somebody not wanting to pay for the electricity and a fifth, an extra bedroom in the home, they certainly don't want to be paying for a multitude of different fees being charged to them. And that's something that property managers need to be aware of, in my opinion. Okay, Kelli, let's kind of move on to tenant representation and what are key steps to a smooth and successful leasing process with tenants?
The same as it is with your landlord clients, you've got to ask the questions up front. And I do new agent lease training at JB Goodwin, a program we call Square One. And like one of the first screens on our presentation is ask questions. And I share that I have made every mistake in the book out there. I've learned what to do and kind of what not to do. I still make mistakes, but they're minimal now. But you've got to pre-screen your clients, your potential clients. When are they moving? How many people are they? Is it family? Are they roommates? What's their budget? Where do they want to live? What type of property? Do they have animals? If so, how many? What kind of dogs? What breeds? What's their? Not all this you don't have to interrogate them on your first conversation. A lot of this is going to be natural conversation. And you're going to have some clients that are going to be, I've got this. They'll just spill. They'll tell you everything you need to know from the get-go, and it makes it so much easier. Some might be a little tight-lipped, and you'll probably find out why, but you'll need to ease those, read the room with them, hesitant to answer some questions. There might be some background reasons, but if, don't lay, what's your credit score? Hi, I'm Kelli. What's your credit score? You don't want to bombard them, because that's a personal question. But you do need to know that at some point before you drive all over town, you don't want to show them places that they're not going to qualify for. You don't want to waste your time, their time, money, gas, frustration, etc. So pre-qualified, screen them, vet them as much as you can from the get-go. So you're going to have some clients that will tell you enough, and then you'll find out maybe after they apply and they're denied because they had something in their criminal background that they never shared with you. Maybe they were hoping it wasn't on there. Maybe they were hoping you wouldn't find out. And then you've got to say, hey, this popped up. You didn't tell me this. I need you to share with me everything that might impact an approval or a declination of your application so I can help you as best as possible. And let's find you a place that you can qualify for and be happy in. It has got to be your conversations from the get-go have to be as honest as possible.
And that would be before you jump in a car and go meet somebody.
Totally.
Yeah, of course, right? Before you set them up on a search for whatever they want.
Right.
I would, the same way that with landlords, you want to set their expectations on the things they can and can't do as a landlord, right? Texas Property Code. I would imagine that you'd approach the conversation with a potential tenant rep with, I'm going to ask you some questions. I want to know about you. And the reason I'm asking these questions is so that we can find you a place to live.
Exactly. Yes.
Every property. And then maybe perhaps another, and I know that you do this, and this is one of the things that I thought was really impressive about the systems that you have in place is you have in your little file book a approval requirement. The lights are out again. This is great.
Well, that's so sorry. It's embarrassing. So I didn't know it's motion activated.
You have an approval requirement, like sort of database of what other all property management, large property management companies in Austin require. And so I think that that's super impressive. And you're able to set tenant expectations, what your FICO score should be for X, Y, and Z management company, et cetera. So you're able to point them in the right direction quickly. So having your arsenal of approval requirements from other management companies that perhaps you see around town is really important. And then telling the tenants, I'm going to ask you these questions. And the more open you are with me, the better job I can do for you. One of the frustrating components about tenant rep that I see often is when tenants apply for a property and they have not read the approval requirements. And then they are shocked, devastated, hurt when they are not approved for a property. And then perhaps it's always a talking point with the agent. At Treaty we like to call the agent and say, please connect with your client. They were not approved. And we want to point that applicant back in the direction of their agent. So perhaps we have discovered something that they were not forthcoming about with their rep. So we always try to guide them back. But one of the things I dislike seeing is when people are spending their $55 on applications. A lot of places do not return that money. And so it's imperative that you have that preliminary conversation with them and then perhaps even be very to the point and say, listen, all these applications, they're going to cost money. And people in the property management companies or the landlords will be adhering to their approval requirements. So if we are not within this range, we either reach out and ask the, landlord rep, hey, what about this? Let's be forthcoming before we spend our money.
Right.
So just conserving funds.
Yeah, with leads I get from you, I'm very well versed with your qualifying criteria. When I respond back to them, whether text or email or on the phone, the first thing I do is I send them the link to your qualifying criteria, and I emphasize, please review this first, because if there's anything in here that may disqualify you, and there may not be any alternatives such as an additional deposit or a guarantor, then we probably need to knock this one out. And I'm happy to find you another property.
Yeah.
And that's the benefit of having those open conversations from the get-go. Because if you know their credit is lacking or they have an eviction, you can, once you get familiar enough with enough property management companies, or if it's in the MLS, you can quickly look over the criteria and say, this one requires a 680, no ifs and buts. We're going to have to skip this one. Let's go find you something else. And on the same note, if there's a situation that could be on the border, I always reach out to listing agents and say, hey, here's the situation with my client. Is this even something that would be considered? If not, I totally understand. If yes, then, we'll go look at the house or maybe apply and see what happens. And I always give that choice back to my lease clients. I'm not going to make that decision for you because it's their money.
Right.
I'm not in the position where I can spend the money because I did make that mistake early on, where I did not read the qualifying criteria. I share that with them. and then they lose out and like, oh, that could have been so easily avoided.
Yes. And I'd imagine that by not doing that, you run the risk of perhaps losing a really great, tenant applicant, tenant client. And perhaps we could go expand a little bit on that topic. When you are working, and I know you do such a high volume, so it might be hard to say, but when you are doing tenant rep, I would imagine for you, it perhaps often evolves into a relationship with a buyer client. Is that correct?
Yes, I've had some buyers.
Right. The buyer client, is something I think that is a lot of the engine behind, the motive behind why people do tenant rep. Also, the hope that they do an incredible job for them on the tenant rep side. And then in a few years, it's time to purchase. I will say that understanding as a property manager, I try very hard to understand the objective of our tenant clients, right? Who are renting from us. And one of the unique things that I pick up on is on the move out or on our annual inspections, we will see that many tenants have not hung pictures. They haven't hung a TV. They have kept stuff off the wall. And their objective is to purchase a home, right? They want their security deposits back. They take really great care of the property that they're renting from. And the objective is to purchase a home. And so I see it in real time all the time. Or when we exercise the early lease termination because somebody has bought a house, right? So I can confirm that the objective of many tenants is to purchase a house, right? That's the next stepping point.
And giving quality service, professionalism can lead to them sharing your info with, and you get more leads, whether it's buyer, tenants, or even listing on the sell or leasing site. You never know where one transaction can lead. I know y'all know this, but sometimes there are some lease leads. I'm like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. And sometimes they end up being your best cheerleader and they refer you out left and right.
Yeah. That's incredible. I want to talk about how we can support our real estate colleagues, our leasing colleagues. I have noticed I take a lot of phone calls. I'm always here for a phone call to talk about if you're an agent dealing with a self-managing landlord or a tenant occupied property that you're considering putting on the market for sale for a client. I'm always here to chat through those things. But one of the observations I've made over the past 2 years where the rental market has become more saturated with inventory, a lot of those landlords that we are bringing on are accidental landlords or they're homestead to rental property conversions, however you guys want to say it. I've noticed a lot of agents who perhaps don't have leasing in their wheelhouse and their standard practice, or book of business, are deciding to do a bit of leasing and dabbling in that. And the reasoning behind a lot of those decisions is sometimes to perhaps recoup from a failed sale, right? So the property was up for sale. We'd had staging. We'd had professional photos. Now we can't sell it, unfortunately, because the market, we just haven't had the right buyer at this time. So we're going to convert it to a rental. And so that same listing agent who specializes or does a whole bunch of production and sales is now all of a sudden becoming a lease listing agent. And their idea is to recoup from the loss of those funds putting into the marketing of the sales listing. I understand that strategy and I sympathize and I completely get it. I understand. But one of the things that I do mention often is, well, you want to perhaps further you want to recoup funds or you want to do a really great job for that client to continue to service that client. And one of the mistakes in making this decision that I see sometimes is that you can do a really big disservice for a client on the lease listing if that's not in your wheelhouse. Right? You can end up spending a ton of time doing something that's not in your standard work practice that you don't have systems or operations in place for. So think about that when you consider taking that on. Kelli, do you have any notes for us on that aspect? Because I'm sure you've probably saved the day for many people to avoid making that.
Yes, I've had several agents reach out to me where the sale is not happened yet and their owners are wanting to do both and see what happens first. And I'm happy to partner with them. And then, of course, I understand to recoup financial losses that have happened so far. Some are going to want to do their own. If it's not something you have a lot of experience with, please talk to someone in your office who does. Have them walk you through, have them partner up with you, maybe be your LA2, and maybe they field most of the calls, the inquiries, and then you're more of the paperwork person. Don't do it alone. Ask questions. Find someone savvy and experienced. So you don't want to risk any kind of violations within the contract. You don't want to negate any positive relationships you've built with your seller client. That's not what you want to do in the long run. So make sure if it's something that you feel you need to do it, but have someone in your back pocket that you can call. Hey, what about this? What about this? Or just partner with you so you can work that part of the transaction, recoup some of your fees, and then, or you can call me and I can help you.
Exactly.
And I mean, with the questions, I'm happy to answer questions as well. But yeah, be familiar with what could possibly happen if you're not careful, because a lease contract is just as legal as a sale contract, and you don't want to endanger your landlord client, your seller client or yourself because you failed to note something in the lease or something went haywire, and now you kind of put yourself in a corner.
When you become a landlord, you are entering into a long-term relationship with that tenant. And so when you, as the landlord rep, you are placing a tenant with a landlord, your client who you care about nurturing that relationship with, it can easily go wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so I almost equate it to like how we refer out vendors, right? So I'm going to refer out a lender who specializes in condos for a condo sale. I'm going to refer out a plumber for a clogged drain. If it's not in my wheelhouse, one of the strengths I have as a professional in real estate is just having really great relationships with experts with something that's outside of my wheelhouse. So if it's not something that I'm super strong at, or I don't want to spend time on it, or whatever, right? We're all competent.
That's a great analogy. Yes.
Referring it out and finding really great referral partners is something that can further your relationship with your client. As a property manager at Treaty Oak, we do not participate in sales transactions. So when we receive a referral for property management, what we will do is we will track the referring agent. And when it comes time to sell, or when it comes, property taxes are out and they want a valuation on their home, we connect the client that we're taking care of with the referring agent that sent them over to us. And so we will always return the client to you for a sale. I know that you were really incredible about doing that, Kelli. And that's one of the reasons that I think you received so many referrals, right? You deliver that client or redirect them back.
Yeah. I'm not here to poach your clients that will eventually turn into buyers, unless you tell me that I can. But my job, if you refer any of your clients to me, my job is to help them find a place to live temporarily until they're ready to buy a home with you. I won't keep, unless it turns into something else, but I'm not going to follow up with them necessarily to try to maintain that relationship. I might check in with them every now and then, make sure everything went great after moving, but I'm not to sneak in and take your place. That's not my job, nor would I do that to anyone with any company. So if you do need help and you do need to refer a lease client to me, my job is to help them find a rental. And then again, unless something says differently, and then I'm out and that client is yours when they're ready to buy.
Sure. I know another big question, and we're coming up on the 45, I think. Two questions that kind of interleak with each other, and it was submitted in the Q&A. And by the way, if you guys have any Q&A questions, please put them in the chat now and we'll get to them in just a few minutes. One of the big questions and, overlying question marks above everyone's head is, how do you get people to sign rep agreements now? And then how are you handling compensation post NAR settlement? I know that JB Goodwin has we're signing agreements with you coming through in DocuSign. That's happening with Compass too. Awesome. We are answering every single, email or question or text message about what the compensation is for our lease agreements. It's a little bit different for property managers, but what are you doing? We'll start with, what is your strategy with the rep agreement? And then what did JB Goodwin put in place post NAR settlement once we've got an executed lease? Oh my God.
Gosh. So it all starts again with the initial conversation. You don't want to say, okay, I need to sign this form and then we can talk. That's not gonna sit well with most. You got to build that rapport. You got to build that relationship. And then you just, simply explain, hey, here is this new policy. In order for me to serve you and be, blah, blah, you all know the verbiage. In order to be the best representative I can for your interests, there is a form that I do need you to sign, and here's what it means. Then you just quickly explain it. I usually start with the short form because that's
Of course,
quick and
yeah, the
dirty,
short
and
form.
they can understand that. It's a one-pager, and then if you want to transition them to the long, even it's just a one property, one day, one showing, that's fine. I was doing that anyway without the form,
Right.
So,
Of course.
and you answer the questions, and when they ask about the compensation, I am finding that really nothing has really changed, at least with renting, and I know selling is kind of similar. On the agent compensation side, most landlords are still offering the typical
Right.
percents. The people that I partner with, I already know their rates and I know what that is. I'll be sure to ask. I will let the clients know in the rare chance that the listing agent or company is not offering compensation. You may have to pay out of pocket. However, I have yet to find that to be the case, but I just want to let you know, and then you can decide whether how you want to approach these properties. So it really has not been a problem. I maybe had like a couple of prospects that refused to sign a form, so I had to let them go. But other than that, people are more than fine signing it. Again, even if it's just a one property, one time showing, and then I'd follow up and say, hey, do you want, how are you feeling about this? I have other properties I can show you. We can amend it. You tell me, how do we want to move forward? And, they're honest. They'll tell you.
Yeah.
But of course, you're going to get those that sign that with an agent every day. You're going to have some not sticking with you, and that happens regardless, with or without the form. But for the most part, I have not had a lot of issues with it.
Awesome. Same. Ditto. Same here. Okay, cool. We'll go ahead and I will also say we did get questions about in the Q&A about late payers and what are our process for landlords when they have tenants who are not up to speed on their payments or they're getting behind. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of the workflow that I follow at Treaty Oak when we have somebody who's late paying rent, right? So for us, all of our leases, leases start, rent is due on the 1st and it is late after the 3rd. So on the 5th or following business day of every month, if we have not received rent or the full amount of rent, we will send over the notice of breach of lease for non-rental payment. So in the TXR zip forms or whatever you guys use within TXR, there are now two notice of breach of lease forms. One pertains to non-payment of rent and the other pertains to other violations, right, within the lease agreement. So we will send that violation to them on the 5th or following business day of each month. So up to you guys. Then on the 10th of each month, if we have not received rent from the tenant or the full amount of rent, we will then deliver the 3-day notice to vacate. And that is a final demand for rent. So, and none of our properties fall under the CARES Act or anything like that. So it is the 3-day notice to vacate. So on the 5th or following business day, you get a notice of breach of lease. That is a demand for rent. Please pay rent now. On the 10th of each month, we deliver the 3-day notice to vacate. There are delivery requirements of that notice. And if a tenant of ours is getting a 3-day notice to vacate, then they are required to pay in certified funds. So that is how that works. And then if they don't pay after the 3 days that you've given them, then we will file for eviction at the associated JP court. I will say that over the past 6 years, we've only had 5 evictions at Treaty Oak out of about 550 tenants every single year.
That's amazing.
circling back to the early termination process, early lease termination process, exercising that can help you avoid evictions and things like that. It allows the conversation to be approached in a professional and reasonable manner, and you can help people with their exit strategy. That's how it works. That's what it's there for. Anything else, Kelli? I wanted to make sure what we'll do is we'll do a follow-up email with the recording of this probably tomorrow. I wanted to just triple check and make sure that you reiterate, Kelli, what's the best way for people to maybe send a referral to you, intro you to clients? What do you prefer? How can you best serve our colleagues?
Either text or email. And if you could just give me a heads up, most of the time it shouldn't be a problem, but in case I'm out of town, or for some reason my schedule's jammed and I really won't be available to help, just send me a quick text or email, say, hey, may have a referral for you. Give me some information if you have it. If not, I'll reach out. And if I can work with them, I definitely will. If I can't, I'll either give you some possible names, or I have plenty of agent colleagues in JB Goodwin who help me with other leads that I can refer them to as well, if you're okay with that. But yeah, just a quick quick text or email, just giving me some info. And if all looks good, then yes, a group email, group text is all. I always appreciate that. That way we all have each other's information. And then I can start the conversation with them individually on the side, and we could get going with their search.
Awesome. Well, we are coming up on leasing season, right? So that is also the driving factor behind the timeliness of this webinar. Leasing season is very seasonal, very cyclical, and it takes place March through the end of June, right around the 4th of July, every single year, without a doubt, right? That's when we always expire our leases at Treaty Oak, because if you are going to experience vacancy, you want that to happen during leasing season when rental demand is at its highest. So we are both about to have a very busy next quarter. I want to just reiterate, if anybody has additional questions, you want to chat with Kelli, you want to chat with me, you have an outlier scenario, I will follow up with an email recap with Kelli's contact info. Everyone on here has my contact info. Kelli, I want to thank you also for being just an incredible colleague and friend, and for sharing your time with everyone and your expertise.
We're all here to help people find places to live.
Of course.
We all do it differently, and I happen to do the leasing for the most part. So, and again, I'm not here just to get your business. I'm here to really truly help you and give you some knowledge and experience from my side. Should you experience the occasional leasing situation, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And I don't have all the answers, and if I don't, I'll tell you and maybe give you a resource. But I think I've had enough experiences over the past almost 8 years where I can probably give you some pretty good information.
Thank you so much, Kelli. And likewise, the whole ship rises. Isn't that what they say? So
yeah.
I'm looking forward to working with many of you guys this leasing season. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Thank you, Kelli.
You're welcome. Thanks, y'all.